There is a sports team that exists which has been terrible for a historic amount of time. It's a tale that is sad, hopeless, but in a sense admirable as well. Chicago State basketball is so good at being so bad. When we think of really bad sports franchises, teams like the Cleveland Browns, the Seattle Mariners, the Sacramento Kings, they all pop up. Those franchises are terrible, but they've also given their fan bases glimmers of hope throughout the years. And they have fan bases to start with, which is more than Chicago State basketball can say. The Cougars are like a bizarro Duke Blue Devils, in that you know what to expect year in and year out. For Duke, it's 25 wins, a tournament bid, and a chance to play for the national championship. Chicago State, on the other hand, it's 25 losses and no real hope of competing for anything meaningful at all. If you've ever played a college basketball video game with a dynasty mode, then you're probably familiar with Chicago State. They are one of those bottom-feeding schools like Sacramento State or Maryland Eastern Shore, Prairie View, that are just one of the bad teams you get to start your career at as a coach. The difference between Chicago State and some of these other schools is just that Chicago State has been consistently bad. There has never been a hope or a glimmer. With Sac State, the past 10 years, they've strung together quite a few double-digit winning seasons. Maryland Eastern Shore once was ranked in the AP Top 25. Chicago State has none of that. They have just put together losing season after losing season after losing season. It's sort of outlandish just how quickly Chicago State has accumulated losses since becoming a D1 basketball program in 1984. In 37 years, they have tasted defeat on 788 occasions. The University of Kentucky, arguably college basketball's greatest team. They've been chucking the ball in the peach basket since 1903. We're talking Teddy Roosevelt's president, Arizona isn't a state, and telegrams are still a thing. That first season at Kentucky isn't exactly one that's recalled fondly by the Big Blue faithful. The Wildcats went 1-2, and those pair of losses came against Georgetown College, a small liberal arts university just north of Lexington, and a local YMCA team who was some reason allowed to play college basketball back in the early 1900s. Despite Kentucky's poor start to college basketball, the Wildcats have only managed to lose 720 games in total in nearly 120 years of existence. How does this happen? How can Chicago State possibly be this bad? Well, this is the story of the Cougars. The Chicago State story starts back in the early 80s when they were playing NAIA basketball. The team was above average. They made the NAIA championship tournament a few years, even making it to the Final Four in 1984 under Chicago State alumni Bob Hallberg. Eventually the school decided to make the move to Division I, joining the top flight ahead of the 1984-85 season. The first 3 years in D1 were quite good for the Cougars. Hallberg led the team to a 16-11 finish its first year in D1, and then a 22-6 win season the following year. This would be the high watermark for Chicago State basketball. Do not get used to this because the story is about to go downhill quickly. The descent begins in the 1986-87 season. The team finished 11-17 that year. Not great by any means. However, bad news really came after the season when Bob Hallberg announced he was leaving the Cougars to go to crosstown rivals UIC. We will revisit what Hallberg did with the Flames in a bit. At Chicago State, the team was sliding towards a black abyss and probably didn't even realize it at the time. The athletic department hired Tommy Suits to replace Hallberg. Suits had recently been let go from his job as head coach at Rice because he didn't post a winning record in any of his 6 seasons with the Owls. Suits lasted 3 seasons at Chicago State, putting together a record of 26-58. This may not sound particularly impressive, but it was a high watermark for Chicago State basketball in the years to come. Suits' 12-win season in 88-89 would be the most wins the Cougars would have in a single season for nearly 15 years. I'm gonna warn you right here and right now that shit is about to get really, really ugly for Chicago State men's basketball. There ain't no Disney happy ending. There's not even a Godfather 3 happy ending. There's no ending. It's just going to be a lot of losing basketball. So if you cannot take that, I suggest you move on to some other video. Ahead of the 1990-91 season, Chicago State hired Rick Pryor to be head coach. Pryor was a Cougar alumni. The administration really felt that he could maybe come in and tap into the local market to bring in recruits, get more fans out, do all that other stuff. These lines are going to be said for every coach Chicago State hires from here on out, by the way, so get used to it. The problem Chicago State has always had is that no coach has managed to successfully do that, and Pryor was no exception. He finished his 4 seasons in charge of the Cougars with 19 wins and a ton of losses. Things were pretty desperate at the school by this point. That would be laid bare by the Cougars' next hire for head coach, a move that even now is baffling. Craig Hodges. Chicago State felt the best man to take the team forward after 7 years of sub 500 basketball was Craig Hodges, a man who had been blackballed from the NBA, still wanted to play professional basketball, and had 0 coaching experience. All of that makes the hire sound terrible. And the hire was terrible. However, allow me to try to explain Chicago State's rationale at the time. Craig Hodges obviously had a high profile in Chicago, playing for the Bulls and winning championships alongside Michael Jordan. Craig Hodges also had knowledge of Chicago State basketball because his nephew had played there for a few seasons before he took over as head coach. It's not like he was coming in blind. His first season in charge was not great. The Cougars finished 6-20, including one of the most dismal losses you will ever hear about, a 105-38 drubbing by the Utah Utes. It only got worse in year 2. Chicago State was unequivocally the worst D1 basketball team. They went 2-25. That was the most losses and fewest wins of any team in the nation that year. So what did Craig Hodges do? Well, naturally, he rolled up his sleeves, hit the recruiting trail, and put all of his time and effort in turning around Chicago State ahead of his 3rd season as head coach. That is actually not what happened at all. Hodges decided that he was going to play in the CBA. He also filed a lawsuit against the NBA for blackballing him, and pretty much paid no attention to his job as head coach of the Cougars. The results were as expected. Hodges lost the first 6 games of the season and was eventually fired. Hodges was replaced by assistant coach Philip Gary, who went 4-17 during the remainder of the 96-97 season. This performance was enough to convince the Chicago State Athletic Department to run it back with Gary for one more year, A decision what saw the team finish with 2 wins and 25 losses before Gary was eventually shown the door in the same fashion as his former boss, Hodges. Let's revisit Chicago State basketball coaching legend Bob Hallberg. As we mentioned earlier, Hallberg left the Cougars to join crosstown rivals UIC. He coached the Flames for 9 seasons before actually being fired at the conclusion of the 95-96 season. So, how did Hallberg do in charge of the rivals? Well, he managed to win 133 games. His record wasn't actually anything special. He finished his career at UIC slightly above 500. But let's go back to the 133 wins. It took the Cougars 6 head coaches and 20 seasons to win 133 games after Hallberg left for UIC. Let this set in. Chicago State was still 11 years away from matching Hallberg's win total with the Flames after he was fired in 1996. And while Hallberg wasn't coaching the Cougars, he did provide the program a much-needed boost in 1998. Momentum had started to build for Chicago State to drop down from D1 basketball and go back to the NAIA ranks. Hallberg did not want to see that happen, and he gave several interviews to local media championing Chicago State's case to be a D1 basketball program. It's hard to know what, if any, impact these interviews did have on Chicago State's decision-making process at the time. However, the team did stay D1. Eventually, attention shifted away from what classification the Chicago State basketball team should fall under, and to who was going to be the next head coach. Philip Gary was out after a 2-25 season. Now, Chicago State needed to find a coach who could bring some credibility, some respect, and hopefully a few wins to the program. After the Craig Hodges debacle, they really needed to get this choice right. And it looked like maybe, just maybe, they did succeed. On paper, Bo Ellis was a slam dunk hire for Chicago State. He grew up in the area and went to high school in Chicago, #1 draft pick in the NBA, a decade as an assistant coach with Marquette, an esteemed college basketball program. There was no reason to think he was not the man to turn the ship around. 3, 10, 5, 2, 3. These aren't Mitchell Trubisky interception numbers. These are number of wins for Bo Ellis in his 5 seasons with the Cougars. Somewhat remarkably, Ellis's .178 winning percentage was actually better than the previous 3 coaches at Chicago State. However, winning 1.7 out of every 10 games is not nearly good enough, and he was eventually let go midway through his 5th year in charge of the team. Despite all of the low points Chicago State basketball had suffered in the previous 16 years, things were actually about to get better for the program. After Bo Ellis was fired midway through the 2002-2003 season, Chicago State tabbed Kevin Jones, an assistant with the program, to take over on an interim basis. He promptly went 0-12. Naturally, this meant Chicago State handed Jones the job on a full-time basis after the season ended. You can't really blame them for taking a who-gives-a-shit approach to the hiring. After all, Chicago State had been the worst team in college basketball for more than a decade and a half at this point. Something weird happened though. Under Jones, the Cougars started winning games. Now, not a lot of games, mind you, but more than was usual for the program at this time. This ended up all being overshadowed by the fact Jones was kind of a dick and definitely a hothead. In his fourth season as full-time head coach at Chicago State, there was an incident that just basically washed away any goodwill he had built with the program. It's a messy, complicated story, but here's the Cliff Notes version. Jones got into a fight with a player. The player then got into a fight with Jones's son, who was also on the team. Jones's son and the player who he got into a fight with actually lived in the same dorm cluster, and pretty much this guy just went after Jones's son constantly. It went in the court. Jones Sr. ended up being suspended from the team while the school carried out an investigation. It was just a bad look all around, and Jones was fired after the season with cause. Jones would end up suing the school in the aftermath of this, a lawsuit he did lose, and it really sort of just cast a dark shadow over what would have been a very promising span for Chicago State men's basketball. After 2 decades of uninspired or unsuccessful hires, Chicago State actually managed to bring in a basketball coach who was good. Benji Taylor was tapped to clean up the mess Jones had left behind, and clean up he did. Taylor wound up going 11-17 in his first season with the Cougars, a minor miracle in and of itself. However, this was an appetizer of greater things to come. In Taylor's second year with the Fightin' Cougars of Chicago State, he guided the team to its first winning record in 23 years. The 19-13 finish was the second best record Chicago State has posted in the school's history as a D1 program. Of course, it's easy to look at the wins and say, hey, that's a good job, but when you dig at the schedule, it was, let's say, soft. 2 of those wins came against non-D1 schools. Another 2 of those wins came against a Houston Baptist team making the transition to D1. There were also a pair of victories against a 27-loss North Carolina Central side, and an additional 2 victories coming against the New Jersey Institution of Technology Highlanders, a program that was in the midst of a record-setting NCAA losing streak. That being said, it was still a hell of a performance by Taylor. It also looked like Chicago State may, for once, reach the lofty heights of mediocrity, where they weren't ever going to really challenge to make the NCAA tournament, but at least they wouldn't be losing 22, 23, 27 games a year. That being said, it was still a hell of a performance by Taylor. It also looked like Chicago State may, for once, reach the lofty heights of mediocrity, where they weren't ever going to really challenge to make the NCAA tournament, but at least they wouldn't be losing 22, 23, 27 games a year. So it should come as no surprise to anyone that Chicago State fired Taylor after the next season, in which he went 9-23. The firing had nothing to do with on-court performance, but due to a constant butting of heads between Coach Taylor and the Chicago State administration. Basically, the coach wanted more support and more money to help build the program. The administration wanted none of that. A long, drawn-out coaching search ensued. After nearly 3 months of trying to find someone to replace Taylor, Chicago State picked Tracy Dildy from nearby UIC Flames, the same school that Bob Hallberg left for all those years ago. All Dildy did in his first 2 seasons in charge of the Cougars was lose 26 games each year. This is where the story takes on a new level of sadness. It's entering the 2012-2013 season. The team has lost 52 games in the past 2 years. They're playing in what is called the Great West Conference. This isn't a real conference, it's really just a collection of schools, many of whom are transitioning from D2 or NAIA to D1, and Chicago State, which just wasn't good enough to be in any other conference. There's no affiliation. The winner of the conference tournament doesn't get into the NCAA tournament. It's just sort of this association of teams that play each other twice a year and then get together after the regular season and play in a conference tournament. Chicago State did not do particularly well in 2012 and 2013. They did win 11 games, which by their standards is above average. They went into the conference tournament and be damned, they didn't win the whole entire thing. Their reward was a trip to the collegeinsiders.com tournament. It's one of these super low-level postseason basketball tournaments, mostly for mid-majors and low conference teams that just aren't good enough to play anywhere else. Winning the CIT is something I guess teams can be proud of. Certainly qualifying is hardly remarkable, especially when you factor in these postseason tournaments are pay to play. Anyway, winning the Great West Conference did see Chicago State receive an invitation in the first round where they played crosstown rival UIC, the Flames, back at it again. The Cougars lost in the first round. That was that, or at least you would think that would be that. Instead, Dildy had a championship ring made to commemorate Chicago State's successful 11-win season where they won a conference that had 5 teams in total. Apparently, Dildy also wore the ring constantly and would use it to quote-unquote motivate his players to perform at a championship level. It did not work. The next season, Chicago State did win 13 games, which is obviously amazing for the Cougars. However, the school was going through massive budget issues. The athletic director was let go, and the school decided to give Dildy the job, meaning he would be his own boss. The following 4 years were really bad. Dildy would lose more than 100 games. He only won 21 games during those 4 years. Eventually, the Chicago State Board of Trustees stepped in and relieved him of both his duties as men's head basketball coach and the athletic director. There is, I guess, some good news if you're Dildy in the fact that he is Chicago State's all-time winningest coach with a staggering 55 wins across his 8 seasons at the helm. He also managed to lose 200 games across those 8 years, meaning his Chicago State teams averaged 25 losses a season. In 2018, Lance Irvin was picked to replace Dildy as the men's head basketball coach at Chicago State. Irvin was a local high school coach and was a respected figure around Chicago. However, the results have been classic Chicago State. In his first year, he went 3-29, and the following season, the Cougars managed 4 wins to go with 25 losses. The 2020-21 season was not kind to the Chicago State Cougars either. Irvin was unable to coach the team out of concerns from COVID-19 because he had previously had cancer and doctors advised him to sit the season out. The associate head coach took over and the Cougars lost their first 9 games. They had trouble finding enough players and coaches because of COVID-19 protocols, and the school just decided it was in the best interest of all parties to cancel the season altogether for the program. There is a silver lining, and that's Chicago State will be back on the court for the 2021-22 season. The school has announced that it remains committed to fielding a basketball team and retaining its athletic department despite the budget concerns facing the school. It would be easy to sit here and say Chicago State sucks and laugh at them for being so bad for so long. It's kind of how the sports world works. We view winning as good, losing is bad, that's a zero-sum game, and if you lose a lot, you become a running joke. That sort of misses the point of Chicago State and its story of losing. In the past 34 years of playing men's college basketball at the D1 level, Chicago State has had exactly one season with a record of 500 or better. Yet, coaches still want to take this job and coach here. Players still want to play for this school that can't win games to save its life. It's impressive in its own right. No Chicago State would mean fewer opportunities for players to play at D1. It would mean fewer opportunities for coaches. It would mean fewer college basketball games. The Chicago State men's basketball program is so damn good at being so damn bad. But in its own weird way, that's worth celebrating. Just don't make any championship rings for it.
Whedon on the follow-away three-pointer. It's strong, and Abnett backs up. Fires up a prayer that goes in from the corner with 1.9 left. The thing you don't want to have happen here, they're not going to guard the passer down on the other end, Doug. Don't throw it out of bounds. Chicago State with a shot at the buzzer, and it goes, and Chicago State has won it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, we'll probably look at the monitor on this one, but as of right now, I believe the officials have given them the bucket, and now they'll look. And I believe that was good. When we were looking live, it looked good from here.